I'm Steve Lascalzo, and this is The Way. Welcome to This is The Way podcast's coverage of the Skeleton Crew series. This is the Season 1, Episode 1 recap and discussion episode. There was a review episode posted on December 4th. That was This is The Way podcast's 163rd episode. If this is your first episode joining me, well, thank you so very much. It all started with the debut of Disney Plus covering The Mandalorian several years ago. Before moving forward, you should understand something about these recaps and discussion episodes. Yes, it is a podcast about what happens in the episode, but I'm not going to hold myself to only discussing the events of this show and this episode. If you haven't watched previous series or movies that are already available through Lucasfilm and Disney Plus as of the date of this episode, well, there's a chance that you're going to hear references to those series or movies. If you consider that spoiling something, well, consider this a warning. Now, hopefully, if you're listening to a podcast about Episode 1 of Skeleton Crew, you've already watched Episode 1. I do these podcasts as more of a deep dive. This is for people who have watched maybe, and now they want a little bit more. They want something in depth. They want somebody who's gone through, not exactly combing the desert, but somebody who has watched with a very critical and very close eye. My process means I don't listen or view other Star Wars content until after this podcast is produced and scheduled for release. So maybe we're not your only podcast. That's fine. My hope's that you're going to find value in my research and my presentation because this is original work. So if that's what you're looking for, let's get started on our own adventure. Again, if you're not familiar with our podcast or the way I do things, I like to start off with cast and crew because sometimes there's little nuggets, little Easter eggs just through the casting. And I find that stuff, well, fascinating. So we'll start with the director, the showrunner, co-writer, Jon Watts. Now, he's probably going to be most notable for the Tom Holland Spider-Man series of movies. The Home series that started with Homecoming and then Far From Home, No Way Home. He's also directed some shows like The Old Man for FX. I think Jeff Daniels is in that. Then there's, that's on Hulu as well. If you have Disney Plus, you probably also have access to Hulu. And then you'd have to have Apple TV Plus for The Wolves movie. That's Brad Pitt and George Clooney. It's on Apple TV Plus. I'm going to tell you, I enjoyed all of those. And then a long time ago, in the before times, he was directing something called music videos. I know young kids probably don't know what that is, but he was directing videos for like Swedish House Mafia, The Wallflowers, Jason Mraz, Switchfoot, Death Cab for Cutie, and maybe most notably, Fatboy Slim. He also directed commercials. As late as 2017, he was directing commercials for Clash Royale, the mobile game. His co-writer on Episode 1 and credited co-creator of the series is Christopher Ford. He's a frequent collaborator with Watts, working 3 other times, including on Spider-Man Homecoming in 2017. No surprise here, but executive producers are Jon Favreau, Dave Filoni, Kathleen Kennedy, Colin Wilson, and Watts and Ford. The runtime for the premiere shows up as 49 minutes in parentheses on the Disney Plus show page. Again, if this is your first time listening, this is something I do. I check to see how long it is from the first action to the credits, and then I give you a report on that for each episode, because that number in parentheses, that includes any previously ons, and then all of the credits that come way after the credit sequence, including the foreign language ones. So the action in Episode 1 only runs 41 minutes, 54 seconds. That's from the start of the opening theme to the appearance of the director credit at the end. That's a 7-minute difference. By the way, I can't remember another time that the actual action on the screen goes directly to the credits, because the starfield that's behind the credits is part of that last scene where we see the ship go into hyperspace. Another thing I like to do is talk about the thumbnail description. That's available on the show's Disney Plus episodes tab, and the episode page description when you pull up the episode and then you back out. Those are identical. Sometimes they're different, but in this case, they're identical. It's the little sentence that you'd probably see if you're old enough to remember TV Guide. It would show next, it would say the episode, and then it would talk a little bit about what you're going to see. Well, in this case, it says, kids from an ordinary planet discover a surprising secret.
Yeah? Good.
There's other crew that really do have an impact on what you're seeing. It's not just all the director and the writer. Director of photography in this one is Sean Porter. He worked for Watts on The Old Man. He was DP for Green Book. That's an Academy Award-winning picture for Best Picture. And I think he's going to be part of 3 more episodes as well. He does a great job in this one. Oliver Scholl and Doug Chang are production designers. Chang is a frequent name on Star Wars Project, but this is Scholl's first, I think. He was PD on Spider-Man Homecoming, the first 2 of 3 Venom movies, The Dark Tower, the 2016 Suicide Squad, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise, Independence Day with Will Smith. That was early in his career. And then he also worked on Jumper, which features Anakin Skywalker. Well, not actually, just Hayden Christensen. The editor was Andrew Eisen. 8 episodes of Star Wars before this one. 2 Book of Boba Fett, 6 on The Mandalorian, 3 from Season 1 and 3 from Season 2. And let me tell you, there were good ones. The Child, The Gunslinger with Fennec Shand, The Reckoning, The Passenger with the Ice Planet Crash, The Jedi, Ahsoka Tano's debut, and, well, her live-action debut, and The Tragedy, where Grogu gets kidnapped and Boba Fett returns with Fennec Shand in that episode. Michael Giacchino's son Mick handles the score, and there's already at least one song from the show available on Spotify. Maybe you've seen it. It's called The Kids Suite. Giacchino, or at least the younger one, has done some TV, like The Muppets Mayhem, Zootopia Plus, I think, is listed on his IMDb, but the work he most recently did for the Penguin series, that gives him a little credit beyond his father's name, I think. Casting for this show is done by Sarah Haley Finn. She has done a lot of work for Disney. She goes all the way back to Iron Man, the first one. She did casting for all 3 Watts Spider-Man movies, The Mandalorian, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, Agent Carter, and Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Join S.H.I.E.L.D. Travel to exotic, distant lands. Meet exciting, unusual people.
She's OG Disney TV.
Yes!
Visual effects supervisor doesn't always get a mention, but it does when it's John Knoll. This is the creator of Adobe Photoshop, the ILM chief creative officer. He's worked on Star Trek, Pirates of the Caribbean. He's a Disney legend. John Knoll, who also coincidentally pitched the idea for Rogue One, the first ever non-saga live-action Star Wars film.
You think anybody's listening?
If you were to take a guess at who the supervising sound editor would be, would you guess Matthew Wood? Well, if you did, you'd be correct. He's just about worked supervising sound editor. I don't even remember a show that he hasn't been. He's also played roles on the show. He was Bib Fortuna in the Book of Boba Fett.
Boba!
Talk about Disney legend. This is the guy who doesn't get a lot of recognition, but he's very, very tied to Star Wars. And then there are 2 more crew positions I want to mention. The first being costume design. Now, if you were not aware, Shauna Tripsick was almost always the one in charge of a Star Wars show, but she passed away before the end of the first season of Ahsoka. Jennifer L. Bryan was in charge of costuming for The Acolyte, and as bad as that show was, costuming was never an issue. In fact, I consider that one of the strong points of that show. Louise Mingenbach gets a turn here on Skeleton Crew, and she has worked Marvel and DC. I I think this one is the one that really jumped out to me. She worked on The Usual Suspects. It'll be interesting to see if they find just one person going forward to take over the aesthetic of Star Wars in costuming. Well, the exception is Andor, because Michael Wilkinson was in charge of all of Season 1 and will be in charge for all of Season 2. And one more position, the stunt coordinators. Those are George Cottle and Colin Fallenweider. Cottle worked with Watts before on his Spider-Man movies and then some other Disney properties like Marvel. Fallenweider has worked with Cottle recently, but also worked with Jude Law before as his stunt double in Captain Marvel. And that guy's also got some Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. experience on his resume as well. All right, now we've reached the cast section.
Nobody here gives their real name.
I just mentioned him. Jude Law is the first acting credit, but we don't see him in this episode. Do we? Maybe we do. He is listed. So I have to believe that he ends up being the mysterious man behind the mask of Captain Silvo. I mean, it does sound like him.
Oh yeah, what did I just say?
These cycles have been lean. And some of you have all but given up on me.
The kids get very prominent credits right behind Law. Ravi Cabot-Conyers is Wim, and I was worried I wouldn't like the acting from the kids, but guess what? No issues. Cabot-Conyers is also Disney alumni, having already voiced a character in Encanto. He was Antonio. Fern is played by Ryan Kira Armstrong, and yes, it's a little weird, but it is indeed Ryan, and I imagine she may have gone by her middle name Kira, but listen, it's 2024. Who knows? And really, who cares? She was Minnie Mayberry in Anne with an E. She also played the younger version of the Taskmaster, Antonia Dreykov, in the Black Widow Marvel movie, and she was the younger version of Chris Pratt's character's daughter, Murray Forrester, in the Tomorrow War. KB is played by Kiriana Crater. That's a lot of Ks. This is her first big role, but she does fine. And don't feel too bad for Robert Timothy Smith. He's covered up by CG as Neil, but he's starring as Liam in the recently released on Peacock, Dear Santa. His picture appeared in Wolves, which was a Watts movie. I think he was both kids in the bar mitzvah. Clooney and Pitt go in to the doctor, and they see that there's a bar mitzvah happening somewhere, or it happened, and he sees a picture. I think that's Robert Timothy Smith, and he was also on Mythic Quest as a content creator. So I think this role as Neil is gonna get him a lot more looks.
Like what?
Well, I don't know, Neil. We'll have to see. Tunde Adebimpe is Wendell, Wim's father. He was most recently in Twisters, directed by Skeleton Crew Episode 7 director Lee Isaac Chung. I had to click on See All to realize that he was also in Spider-Man Homecoming as Mr. Cobble, at least according to IMDb. Things like that are what got me going through the cast list, though. I find it fascinating how, you work with somebody in Hollywood and then you work with someone successful earlier in their career. That can lead to big things for you, too. Another one of the parents in the show, Carrie Condon, is Fern's mom, Undersecretary Farah. She is the voice of Friday, which is the successor to Tony Stark's AI program Jarvis after Paul Bettany became Vision. So she's the voice of Friday in any of the movies that take place after the one where Vision shows up. She's been working a long time. She was actually also Mike Ehrmantraut's daughter, or daughter-in-law, in Better Call Saul, and she was also Molly Sullivan in Ray Donovan. You may have seen her in that role. I always like to think, though, getting a Star Wars role is going to be what you're eventually remembered by, unless you've got a name as big as Jude Law already.
If at first you don't succeed, try again.
We can talk about the pirates we see early in the show. Brutus, the werewolf-looking Shistavanan pirate, voiced by Fred Tatasciore, and performed by Stephen O. Young in the costume. Gunter. Yes, Jaleel White does appear on screen. You may not have noticed him, but you do see him at the beginning in scenes behind the captain. There's Chailt or Kelt, One of the pirates is Dale Souls. I don't know if she's really famous, but she's a longtime Hollywood actor. The merchant captain is Jeffrey Lower. Marty Matulis reprises his role of the pirate Vane. Yes, this is the same pirate that was in The Mandalorian Season 3 as part of Pirate Captain Gorian Shard's crew. I think at the end of his time on the show, he kind of goes off into space. He doesn't get shot down, but he goes off. Now, I don't know if the show takes place before that in Season 3 or if it takes place after that in Season 3. I'm not 100% sure. So is this before his time or after time? If he makes it through the show, it could be either, right? Beef is another one of the pirates. Dominic Burgess. I guess if you know the actor, you'll know his face as one of the pirates, and maybe we hear his name called in a future episode. And then there are some other small roles, but they're still named. The mean kid at the bus stop is Vivian Sachs. This is her first Star Wars, and it just says mean kid. Runa is voiced by Ileana Castillo. That's the little alien that Neil likes. She is performed by Phoenix Notary. Asai Daniel Cross is one of the human kids, maybe one of Bonj Falfa's friends, or maybe just one of the other kids at the bus stop. I'm not sure. Or maybe he's one of the human kids. Maybe he's the one who says, "That's not fair, I'm the analyst." I'm not 100% sure. Geneva Carr is Numa. I don't know who Numa is. I think it's one of the droids. She played Marissa Morgan on Bull. And that's where I noticed the name from. Then there's Bonj Falfa. I just mentioned that name. That is Shane Almagor. Doesn't have a huge role, but Bonj Falfa sounds a heck of a lot like Bob Falfa from American Graffiti, a role played by Harrison Ford. So the performance artist for Neil is Casey Barrowman, but I thought I saw scenes where Robert Timothy Smith was acting. I thought I saw behind the scenes footage of that, so I'm not sure. Maybe it was just for one or two scenes where he couldn't be there. Rob Ramsdell did the performance for SM33. Nick Frost is going to voice him, and SM33 Smee didn't do a whole lot in this episode. His arm just came down, right? Dawn Denninger, I saw her name. She frequently plays a Rhodian. That's a type of animal, but she performed Numa and a Snivian pirate. I think she's been a Snivian before too in one of the previous shows. Kerry Jones, another frequent Star Wars named. He performed as a pirate called Null. Mike Estes performed Pax, the Gran that had an eye patch. Not the alien that got his eye shot out, but it's a Gran with an eye patch. Then Jasper Anderson, great name, Snobbius Snee. Joe Osmond was the Ithorian kid in the classroom, the one that wanted to be an analyst. Carrie Gunnerly was Mrs. Ick. That's the one that Wim almost runs into while she is walking her pet. There are other voice actors who lend their voices to various characters, and they don't really get, or they don't always get named, but I like to include them because these are legends of Star Wars in a different way. You probably heard their names or heard their voices without knowing who they were if you play video games or have seen some of the other shows, even just cartoon shorts, like David W. Collins. He played a comms officer in Ahsoka. Tons of video game voice acting to his credit. He also works in the sound department and music departments for Lucasfilm. Terry Douglas, listen to her resume. The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi, The Rise of Skywalker, Rogue One, Solo, Obi-Wan Kenobi, The Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, The Acolyte, Battlefront 2. That's just Star Wars, and that's not probably all of it. Robin Atkin Downs, he is the voice of Cam Syndulla on The Clone Wars, among other roles. Like, also on Clone Wars, Rush Clovis, the guy who tries to court Padme Amidala. He's also been in SWTOR, KOTOR 1 and 2, Thrawn in Star Wars Empire at War, Forces of Corruption. Then there's Michael Ralph, appeared in multiple games, including KOTOR. Helen Sadler was an HK assassin droid, the one that confronts Ahsoka on Arcana. But she's also the voice of Rey in LEGO Star Wars games. She's done more, like the Ishitib Guildmaster in the Book of Boba Fett, Jyn Erso in the Forces of Destiny shorts, lots of video game work, including the Elder Scrolls Online. She was in SWTOR as Commander Henri. There's Kari Waldgren, 2 episodes of the Clone Wars Legacy, games like SWTOR, The Force Unleashed, Squadrons, Fallen Order, LEGO Star Wars, the Revenge of the Sith game, and then there's Shelby Young, LEGO Star Wars Rebuild the Galaxy, Forces of Destiny, Terrifying Tales, and Summer Vacation, all as Princess Leia. She was Tota Jo in the Young Jedi Adventures cartoon, Star Wars Visions, Tales of the Empire, The Bad Batch, Jedi Survivor, Tales from Galaxy's Edge, and 2 more names. I already mentioned Matthew Wood. He does voices, additional voices in this show as well. And then there's Sam Witwer, who played...
You and I will be working much more closely from now on.
Darth Maul in Rebels. Yes, he voiced Darth Maul in Rebels, among all of the other things, including playing a very important role in Force Unleashed as Starkiller. So many names. Listen, I don't expect future recaps and discussions to take as long before we get to the action. I just thought, the first episode out, let's talk about many of the names. If some of the names are changed, or there's new names added, maybe we'll go back over this. But I'm not going to do this every single time. I think it's important that we get to the show.
He can go about his business.
You can go about your business.
Move along.
Move along. Move along.
So, if you have the ad-supported Disney Plus version, you're going to have to sit through 30 seconds or so of commercials after the Disney splash. Then there's the Lucasfilm Limited, the Star Wars intros over the beginnings of the first song release for the show through Spotify called The Kids Suite. And then new characters are in the Star Wars intro. Among those, a helmeted pirate that we will soon meet. There's an RX unit. Anakin appears. There's a school security guard from Skeleton Crew, and a droid that we will meet later called SM-33. Then we fade into a star field, not a scroll, but we do get text over the screen. It's not red text like Ahsoka, but blue, kind of like the end credits. It says, since the fall of the Empire, the New Republic has maintained order. Now, really? I mean, we know from the sequels they're doing it poorly and with a lot of corruption. The text continues with a second page. And yet, remote hyperspace routes are increasingly plagued by piracy. That is true. Then there's a third page. Pirates gets capitalized here like Empire and New Republic were. It says, these pirates boldly brand their armored hulls as a sign to all ships. And then the words fade in, surrender or die. The point of view pans down to a planet, and there's debris floating in from the right side of the screen. The planet is in the background. We don't actually pan onto the planet. It's just in the background in the starfield. There's a freighter that's damaged. It slows to a stop on the screen, and there's a shadow eclipsing the light. The first thing that came to mind when the boarding tubes smash into the side of the ship were planks on a regular, seafaring ship. When we see inside the ship and the freighter crew is preparing for the pirates to board, I don't think it's hard to imagine being brought back to those first moments of the very first Star Wars. The crate of fruits that we see is a tip-off to a later scene that this isn't going to be a big score. And I think these are actually the melon-like Meiloorun fruits that we've seen before. We first heard about, I think, in the animated show Rebels, if I'm not mistaken. At least that's where I first remember them. This freighter has big guns and actually uses them, but story and plot efficiency really get off to a great start with this. We could have been left to wonder, why is this freighter not blasting all the boarding tubes? Immediately, pirates grapple in, and they disable the only turret we see with explosives. They even get in a little arr in space. So it's not going well for the crew. Brutus the werewolf-like Shistavanian makes his entrance, and dual-wielding pistols, 3 more strapped to his chest. Very cool.
Captain Silvo, the ship is yours. Excellent work, Brutus. Excellent. Now, take me to the vault.
I mean, this is Jude Law, right? It's not like they're even trying to hide it with voice-altering technology. I'll just talk about this here. I'm already in on this show, okay? At this point, sitting on the couch with my family watching, I'm almost in tears with how much I'm already connecting. This show could absolutely end up being terrible, but I am in. Maybe this is even the best written episode, but I wasn't feeling well this week, so it took me a while to even get started on notes for this episode. As I'm writing this on Friday the 6th, I've only seen the first episode, but my kids have asked every day since we saw the first one, when are we going to watch the second episode? Why do I love this show? I know some are going to say, well, this is straight up copying stuff from other movies and even earlier Star Wars.
We have no credit shipment. This is a bulk freighter.
If this is a bulk freighter, why is your vault magnetically sealed?
We are protected by New Republic decree.
I'm well aware of the callbacks, especially that one to the dialogue during A New Hope when Vader's choking Captain Antilles. I'm still loving the show. That doesn't mean there's nothing to call out. I mean, how fast do they cut into that magnetically sealed vault? I remember some Jedi taking lightsabers to magnetically sealed doors, and I mean, I guess you're telling me the cutters work faster, or maybe there was something cut out? But hey, listen, when it's just one little thing like that, I can easily forgive it. The characters all make sense. So do the motivations.
Some of you have all but given up on me. Your good old captain. It's all forgotten now. Because at long last I brought you to the only thing that matters. Cold, hard credits.
I don't blame you if you really didn't connect with any of the pirate crew. I didn't catch all of them until I watched the second time, and specifically we're looking for them. Gunter is there. That's the character that we talked about in previous show episodes, news updates, Jaleel White, Steve Urkel. And there are other characters mentioned in the past This Is the Way podcast, Star Wars news updates. We saw named. They're there. You can pick them out. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time picking out and mentioning every single thing. I think we're going to meet these guys soon enough. In fact, if you've already watched both episodes of the show, you probably have a better understanding of the show than even I do at this point. The pirates in the show find out there's only one credit. It is clear they're going to hold Silvo accountable. I just want to call the guy Captain Silver. The scene ends before we find out who it is, and we get the title screen.
Unhand me, you villain! Never! You'll spend eternity in my dungeons being tortured until you die! No!
We then go to Wim in his room playing with action figures, and I cannot be the only person to immediately think of Spaceballs.
So, Princess Vespa, at last, I have you in my clutches.
No, please, leave me alone.
Lord Helmet, what? You're needed on the bridge, sir.
Knock on my door! Knock next time!
Yes, sir.
Did you see anything?
No, sir. I didn't see you playing with your dolls again.
Good!
And right away, I'm identifying with both Wim, but also his father, Wendell. I mean, don't forget your jacket. I didn't. Yeah, you did. Did you play with my stuff? Don't leave your toys all over the place. You're going to be late for school. I mean, he isn't this time, but I was expecting the scene from the trailers when he chases after the tram, but we get something much cooler. Now, again, I know from the trailer, Neil's his friend. But I just love this next scene so much.
You should not have come here.
Wim and him with the lightsabers. Wim pretends to get his arm cut off. Very Star Wars. Neil pretends to get sliced open with his guts everywhere. That's not very Star Wars, but he gets something in his eye, and then we see they've had this audience the whole time. I mean, my kids loved the scene, and they laughed, and I am loving this show. There's an RX droid driving the school tram, and that brought Star Tours and Oga's Cantina to mind. They've appeared in Rebels, I think, and I believe also the Book of Boba Fett as well. There's Neil on the bus or on the tram talking about math homework. Even though it's not algebra or something recognizable, they're talking about basic tables. It felt like any other kids talking about schoolwork. Wim is listening, but it's what he's watching that I'm paying attention to. Again, John Watts gives an extremely relatable scene here. Wim might as well have been holding an iPad or a kid's Kindle. Now, he is reading. That's nice, instead of he's just watching YouTube clips or something. There's Aurebesh on the tablet. And listen, I'm going to confess. I did not take time to translate all of this. Translating has surely already been done. And in fact, it has, because I checked Reddit, and wouldn't you know it, somebody already did all the work for me. That saves me a lot of time. And yes, I could have done it myself, and I could have double-checked. At some point, this episode will be 2 hours long if I try to do it all myself. And the prep work already took me 2 days. It was super easy to find this. All I had to do was search for the story on Wim's datapad. And guess what? It does actually have something to do with the previous scene. I will paraphrase the first 2 pages. It says, a Jedi named Lena ignites her blue lightsaber in a dark cave. I am assuming this is not Chancellor Lena So from the High Republic novels, but maybe it is. I would think this kind of knowledge would have been outlawed by the Empire, but maybe this is all that was left, or maybe this is a special planet. The story makes a point to say Lena wasn't afraid, and that she was ready, and then a Sith appears with a red lightsaber, and get this, the Sith hisses at her, "You should not have come here," just like Neil. I mean, clearly, Neil and Wim are sharing these stories.
That was a pain in the trunk.
I just love Neil so much. My kids love Neil. Who doesn't love Neil? I love the way he's a friend to Wim, too. And we see there are going to be 2 more joining us by the end of this episode. Fern and KB, they're on a speeder. Wim seems to be noticing these girls for the first time. I don't know how, if they all go to the same school, but maybe he's only noticing, hey, they're taking a shortcut. So that's what I think he's asking about when he asks Neil if he saw that. There's more Aurebesh along the buildings, along the tram path. And now I'm not going to translate all of it. I'm sure they have just names like, store or this or that. Maybe there's some Easter eggs in there. And if this episode wasn't going on long enough already, I'd probably take the time to, look at it and see if there's something interesting. There have been in the past, and Season 3 of The Mandalorian, some of the Aurebesh were like, if you're watching this, it was like a joke inside the Aurebesh. I don't think that's the case here. The town just feels real cool. It's got a great aesthetic. Retro, futuristic, Epcot, or People Mover at Disney World. Maybe something like Walt would have imagined Tomorrowland. Advanced tech, but Art Deco. The Aurebesh on the building that Neil and Wim are walking to, that clearly says at-attin Middle School. And I guess not clearly in this scene, but later when they're walking out of class, you can clearly see what it says. It's at-attin Middle School. And then there's an example of something that shows like the Acolyte did not do well, but I think Skeleton Crew is doing great, at least through the first episode. Wim notices, and importantly, we get to see that he notices Fern and KB have beaten them to school. So we can call back to this shortcut later when Wim is late for school. These are just a couple of short scenes that are cut in, but it's very efficient storytelling. We then see inside the classroom. It's not the first time we've seen one, though. We got to see one in The Mandalorian. I think Season 2, Grogu steals those blue macarons off that kid. Well, just like in that show, there's a teaching droid. Students are bored. And Wim is so bored, he's using what looks like an Etch-a-Sketch during class. The teacher, the droid, is using words like fungibility, free-floating variable tables, algorithms, liquidity modeling, ledgers, multiple currencies. The droid states there's a contrast between what happens inside and outside the barrier. That makes me think, the math has got to be the same, right? Whether it's inside or outside, but things may be different somehow outside of the barrier. And what is the barrier? Well, we're going to hear more about that later in the episode.
And now, class, it is time for a special visitor from the Office of the Supervisor.
Good afternoon, children. My name is Undersecretary Farah.
Hello, Undersecretary Farah.
Wim gets caught drawing a Jedi on the Etch-a-Sketch by the special guest, Undersecretary Farah. Now, why would a bureaucrat take time out of a busy schedule, and she makes a point of saying she's busy, to talk to this class of middle schoolers? Well, again, good storytelling, we find that out later too. We hear from her about the career assessments test, and maybe that's kind of like ASVAB in our world. The planet at-attin, as she called it, seems to have a setup where you take this test, and then you get just placed in classes that fit your aptitude, and your desires have nothing to do with your future. So is this a terrible thing? I mean, if you're a kid, that sounds horrible. I know there are some adults that might have wished, or maybe still wish, that they were given the tools necessary in school to make sure that what they're good at makes a good career. But Wim is not like a worker bee. He's got dreams and aspirations, and they're not bad ones. Farah name-checks the great work, and that is definitely tied to Chancellor Lena So in the High Republic book series. I do not think that's a coincidence. I'm not sure if that name appears in other media, but I know for sure it's in the High Republic, because I think the Jedi from the story must be the same Lena, and maybe at-attin has some tie to the High Republic somehow, because this story that Wim has been reading, was saved through the time of the Empire. It's got Jedi in it, it's got Sith in it, and they mention great works. There's got to be some tie. Why would it mention Sith if they have been extinct for a millennia? If this planet in particular has some tie way back to, it's got a history of preserving knowledge behind a barrier. So the wiki, the Star Wars wiki, talks about great works, the Starlight Beacon, the Republic Fair, Bacta cultivation, which was a healing thing. They used Bacta tanks. So at one time, I guess, they didn't know how to do that. And then there's also the peace treaty between Mon Calamari and Quarrens. So those are all considered great works. Maybe at-attin is one we just haven't heard of. Maybe it was isolated from the rest of the universe or the galaxy and has gone on a different path. Here, Farah says one of the great works is keeping the Republic peaceful and strong. She doesn't say New Republic. And the teaching droid asks students for their input. We get to see Neil fawn over Runa here when she says she wants to be a senior statistical accountant. And then a Thorian, without a translator, says he wants to be an analyst.
Oh, yes, Runa.
I want to be a senior statistical accountant.
Ah, yes. And you.
There's a button, buddy. There's a button.
No fair, I want to be an analyst. Don't worry, we need all the analysts we can get.
I don't know about you, but this brought to mind the scene in Andor where there's that floor that is full of people that are all doing the same thing. All their cubicle areas look like the same. We need a lot of analysts. So if the Empire needed plenty of analysts, is this just more of the same bureaucracy in the New Republic? Is it bureaucracy that dates way back to the High Republic, or is this just at-attin? Then Wim gets called on by Farah, and probably that's because she saw, hey, this kid's not paying attention. Let's see what his idea is. He does not say he wants to be a Jedi.
You.
Well, my dad's a systems coordinator, but I think I want to really help people, like if there's danger or something.
That's not a career. That's what safety droids are for.
Study hard, get plenty of rest, and don't be nervous. Remember, we all have a place in the great work.
It's not a bad thing to want, though, helping people. I think this is something that's probably been hammered into the kids of this world. You're not contributing to the great work, even if you want to do good, unless you're doing it the way we want you to do it. You fall in line and do it our way. The ends don't justify the means here. The means are the ends. And I think that is trouble. The Empire and the New Republic both had this same trouble. The Empire tried to make it happen through force, and the New Republic tried trusting people. And it turns out the Force, through legions of Jedi was the only thing that kept the Republic operating. And one could make an argument that they didn't even do a great job, especially towards the end, right? Wim and Neil talk after school. Neil, he's such a great friend. I mean, he talks about being willing to fail to be with Wim, but we find out why he swooned over Rona.
I don't want to get held back, Wim. I wouldn't be in the same class with Runa anymore.
As Runa?
I like her.
But you've never even talked to her.
I'm working up to it.
Well, I mean, everybody probably likes Neil at this point, right? He's concerned Wim is not ready, but at least Neil has something of a spine, right? He's not going to blindly follow his friend, even though if it's just for love. He does call out Wim, though, for basically saying, I mean, he didn't say it, but he basically says he wants to be a Jedi.
What? No, I didn't.
You basically did.
I didn't.
Well, basically you did.
So what if I did?
And then we hear the line that I have been using in podcasts when referencing Skeleton Crew since I first heard it online as part of a leaked trailer.
Don't you ever want to do anything exciting?
Like what?
What's the context? Well, we're going to see. Fern and KB are the adventurous types that Wim is going to hook up with later in the episode. We see them on a hoverbike again. Fern is a daredevil, but she may be a pretty decent pilot, at least based on what we see of her biking. KB, she's the sensible friend. She's along for the danger, still urging her friend to be careful. And the ride doesn't end because they're caught or something. It only ends because the bike fails and they come to a stop. It's Neil and Wim, though, who we cut to walking. Neil urges Wim, don't study too late. And we hear of his family, and then we get to see a little bit of them. He's got a mom, a dad, siblings called Jobo, Jorko, and Tulu. I mean, just great. We get to see a loving family on TV. But it's immediately contrasted by Wim arriving home to nobody. Empty house. His dad, remember, already told us earlier he's going to be late. Wim isn't then just yearning for an adventure, maybe. We don't yet know about Fern and KB's families, but we do cut to those girls in the garage. KB, it turns out, doesn't need this visor that we've seen her wearing. It seems to be kind of like a mod. She's tech savvy. She's the only one with her hands on the bike. She seems to be the only one that works on it. And guess what? They need a new power converter. So not going to be as easy as going to Tashi Station, huh? We hear about a scrapyard, and then we meet Bonj Falfa. Find out there's supposed to be a race this weekend. Bob Falfa is Harrison Ford's character in American Graffiti. That's a George Lucas film preceding Star Wars, of course. Now, I gotta be honest, I didn't remember that, but I did find that out very quickly after Googling the name to see if Bonj Falfa had appeared in another Star Wars, or if it was an homage to something. Well, guess what? That's also where I discovered a nice Easter egg, because there's a scene where the girl's bike is breaking down and it takes them right past what looks like a diner, and it's a diner with a sign in Aurebesh that if you freeze frame, it clearly spells out Mel's, even with an Aurebesh apostrophe, and Mel's is in American Graffiti. Bonj has a couple of friends with him. One's a Rhodian, and Bonj's jacket has a bunch of patches. Now, did he earn them? Or is this his dad's jacket? Maybe he was a pilot. Or maybe his mom's jacket. Was she a pilot in the Rebellion or the Empire? His jacket has more patches than Fern's. But maybe neither of them earned any of those patches. Some of those patches are the same on his jacket as they are on hers that we'll see later. And in this one scene, we're going to hear of the care that KB has for her friend. Kind of like Neil for Wim. But also, we find out what motivates Fern.
Maybe we should ask to postpone.
No way. You gotta act tough. It's the only way to deal with jerks like that.
Who cares about racing Bonj Falfa?
I care. What else fun is there to do on this planet?
Some great editing. There's the toss of the busted power converter over KB's shoulder. I'm not going to say that reminds me of The Last Jedi, but she tosses it over her shoulder, and then it cuts to Fern's bag falling to the sidewalk. We follow Fern home. Seems like she lives in a ritzy neighborhood, maybe one of the nicer ones. We find out we already met her mom. and she's home early. We get treated to a little Jedi mind trick, though, first. Fern runs a program on the housekeeping droid to lie for her.
But you weren't upstairs studying.
Run memory override. Yes, I was. You just didn't see me.
I didn't see you, Fern.
You are allowed to hate callbacks like that if you want, but that's what I love. It's not a direct copy. It's not even a cheap imitation. It's a reworked line that makes sense in the story, and you wouldn't even notice it if you weren't such a huge fan. It's not shoehorned in. It's there, and it makes sense. Now, we talked about Fern's mom, right? This is the same character. It's Undersecretary Farah. It turns out, remember how she was at school earlier? And yeah, she was there to make sure Fern was at the top of her class. Now, was she ever legitimately the top of her class? Or maybe Farah is concerned for her daughter's education so much that maybe she's putting so many expectations on her. Maybe she's greasing the wheels a little bit. I mean, it's not clear. Was she checking in on grades or was she greasing the wheels? What I've already been shown in Star Wars tells me she was making this happen.
I'm just so proud of you.
So maybe there's just a little bit of political corruption in the New Republic, even down to schools. But it's also just possible that maybe she just wants to be a good parent. Maybe she's guilty of wanting too much for her kid. So if we're keeping track so far, I've got something about almost every character on at-attin with which I identify. Really super easy for me to be involved in this show. We end up seeing something similar at home with Wim. His dad, Wendell, gets home, not abusive, not distant, but also not present. And if I'm honest, this seems worse to me than what I see with Fern and Farah. Maybe it's because I try hard to make sure I go over a devotional with my youngest and my oldest every night, but Wim's dad just isn't there. He's not into helping his son study or get a good night's sleep. He's more interested in what time do I have to myself. And then Wim reveals something happened to his mom.
I don't think I could sleep. Will you please read me a story like Mom used to?
Sorry, buddy. I gotta work. Bedtime stories. Aren't you getting a little bit old for that? Love you.
Love you.
Super on brand for Disney and Star Wars, I'd say. Something happened to the mom, right? Wendell's dad finishes his part in the scene by basically insulting his son. Aren't you a little old for bedtime stories? And yes, I know they both say I love you, but I don't know if Wendell is really thinking I love you or just saying it. And, what does that even mean? I don't think he's present in this moment with his son. He's just trying to get through this interaction. Wim takes out the data pad, looks over a news story, and again, from Reddit, it's not me, I'm not translating. This one seems to be about Jedi going through the forest, then sensing a great beast. Now, there's a forest scene in this episode, right? I don't think anything from the translations, though, are visible ties to this story. Yes, there's something abandoned or overgrown, like the hut of the woodchopper. Yes, there's a droid in the ship. That's like the Tin Woodsman, I guess, in Wizard of Oz, but this is definitely not a Wizard of Oz story. There's nothing yet, although there is eventually going to be. I'm just trying to get home, right? So maybe nothing yet about a great beast, unless you consider the ship a beast. There's nothing about a herdsman or a flower. The forest in the story is named Hadaka, so I guess we're going to see if there's a callback to that later in the first season. Maybe Hadaka Hondo Anaka? I don't know. That's a stretch. Will there be a Jedi named Druin or Druids in the story? I don't know. Is someone going to sense a great disturbance by using the Force? We will see. Wim is reading these stories to get to sleep, right? And then the point of view pans up for us to a night sky. Swirling clouds, greenish clouds, small red lights are there, but the stars are all blocked out. This turns out to be the barrier that we've heard mentioned before.
No! Wait! Stop the trap! I overslept! You can make it! I'm gonna take a shortcut! A shortcut!
Wim oversleeps, he misses the tram on test day, and it's a fun sequence. we see him try and use that shortcut that he saw Fern and KB take yesterday. This scene has a roll through an opening door. The garage door opens and he rolls through it, kind of like Indiana Jones. Then there was a hover bike scene. Both made me think of E.T. the Extraterrestrial, maybe even a little Back to the Future. And then there was the forest bike scene. You can't help but think about Return of the Jedi, right? I love that the hover bike had tassels. And then it makes a sound with a bell when he tosses it over the road barrier. Wim does the slide stop in front of the barrier and then decides to cross the barrier. And this, for you young listeners, is called foreshadowing. Great example, efficient writing. Again, this show is doing everything right. Neil, meanwhile, he's worried about his friend. He's at the test. He's on time. The proctors of the test are in the middle of giving instructions, and they name check refresher, which is the in-universe term for bathroom or toilet, but desk controls?
If you must use the refresher, remain seated and utilize your desk controls. If you finish a section early, wait silently for the next section to begin. Any questions?
Yeah, I have one. Does that mean they go right there at the desk? Wim loses his helmet in the forest, and his slide stop at the ravine keeps the bike safe, but he goes over, and it's a ravine, so maybe this is Eastwood Ravine? I don't know, another Back to the Future 3 reference? He ends up at the bottom, and I love the score here. Very Indiana Jones. There's a secret going to be revealed kind of a music playing as Wim ends up finding the door. I also very much like the acting from Cabot Conyers when school security finds him.
Student, you are in violation of school attendance protocols. Come with me.
Okay! How?
Wim is waiting for judgment to come. Kind of a outside the principal's office feeling to this scene. He's allowed his data pad while he waits, and he uses his time well, I think. Clearly, he's seen this door before. He found it again in his stories. So this is the third time that I ended up using Reddit for translation in this one episode. It talks of knights building a temple fortress, Jedi Knights. And if you watch Rebels, or maybe played the Fallen Order game series, you may recall these kinds of temples. It's not like the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. These are the ones that are in the wild, so to speak. I also clocked the first image we see in the scene had this tower split in two at the top, and that's very reminiscent of Vader's fortress and the way that's been depicted. So maybe that rule of two thing is something that was taken or adapted or corrupted from actual Jedi Order and not just part of the Sith Order. Maybe it's a nod to the notion that Lucasfilm developed recently of this Force dyad thing. That is not a George Lucas thing, mind you. So Wim is flipping through the scenes of his story, and he comes across that final page that we see it. And that's the last page that we see in this scene. It's not the last page that he is looking through. But on that page, it shows an image not too different from the way the door he just found appears. This makes sense. Of course he's going to jump to the conclusion that, hey, this door looks similar to this symbol. I found a Jedi temple. It's wishful thinking. The story he's reading talks about a Jedi temple hidden underground during times of danger, and then Jedi meditating and growing in connection to the Force, being a beacon of light in the darkness when the galaxy needs heroes, and when the time is right, the fortress will rise to the surface and the Jedi will stand ready to fight for justice and peace.
What are you in for?
That's my assessment. What are you in for?
I race bikes so the droids hate me. I saw your bike. It's totally wizard.
Totally wizard? I really never liked that phrase. It's so wizard. It is a callback, though, to the Phantom Menace. And in this context, it works because it creates this common bond. Fern definitely seems like the kind of person that's going to respond well to a comment, well, specifically about her piloting, but by extension, her bike. How does she respond? With a lie. She lies about a proctor taking a kid to a basement to work in the mines. Wim doesn't really fall for it. And I'm glad they wrote it that way, because I think this is actually kind of a test that Fern is giving to people that she meets to see if they're worth knowing. You know, it's not the truth, but if this guy falls for it easy, then he's a mark. But he doesn't. Wendell, Wim's father, arrives, and he's mad. He had the League work for this. His first question isn't, hey, are you all right? He does eventually ask about the clothes being dirty, but Wim's father is not really concerned with Wim's situation. He's worried about how it reflects on him. And Wim shows Dad, hey, Dad, look, I found a Jedi temple. Wendell doesn't care. He says, I managed to get you a second chance, but there's a 50-point penalty on the test, which he even admits. Basically, you have to get every question right just to pass. I mean, is that even a second chance? The one question we heard him ask Wim, he got wrong the night before, right? And presumably, that's not the toughest question that he would face.
Can it with this Jedi Temple nonsense. You go home, you study. Tomorrow, I will drop you off personally. I expect you to pass. Do you understand?
Yikes. Well, Fern clearly hears a mention of Jedi Temple. She's up for adventure. She asks about it. Wim, he's not as good a liar, at least now, to Fern as Fern was to him. He says, I'm going home, but he goes to Neil's house, and his younger siblings are there watching basically the same thing that the young Wookiee in the infamous Star Wars holiday special was watching. I mean, we can say it. It's weird. It's a weird thing. We don't have to pretend that it isn't. But it's in-universe kids programming. I mean, have you seen what some kids think is entertaining? This certainly isn't Bluey that they're watching.
What? How very dare you!
Tulu tells Wim through the window, hey, Neil's upstairs. Apparently, Neil is taking a bath. And Wim wants his friend to join him on this quest. So Neil says, yes, they go to the garage for Dad's tools. Neil is again the voice of reason. Let's tell adults. And this is where we hear the title of the episode.
Why do we have to dig it up?
Because this could be a real adventure. No more pretend.
He didn't even ask how assessment went.
How did assessment go?
I think good.
Okay, that's great. Let's go.
But promise we won't get in trouble.
I promise.
Okay.
It's a weak promise, isn't it? I mean, there's no way that Wim can guarantee that they're safe. But it's a great bunch of dialogue. Did anyone else notice that Neil's father has a St. Pauli's girl kind of picture in the garage there on the wall? I thought that was pretty funny. Neil's dad also keeps things pretty neat, and I feel like that tells me he doesn't really use the garage that much. They head off, Neil and Wim. Jedi 1, that feels like a reference to Rogue One, but also, I'm not holding two kids responsible for being super creative with call signs here. Jedi 1 and Neil suddenly coming up with Jedi 2. That feels real. I'm very aware adults are writing this script for kids. And hey, I think they're doing a great job. Mick Giacchino, he's also doing great work. There was like a military type march sound to them going out to the ravine. And I also laughed out loud when Wim kind of launches himself off the edge. So he thinks he's going to rappel down all cool. And then he ends up pulling Neil over with him.
Here, just hold the rope.
Careful of rope burn.
Right. Okay, ready? Yeah. 3, 2...
Rope burn, hilarious. Fern and KB pull a prank on them, and I love how both boys, so innocent, they immediately give up their names. Neil reveals his secret crush in school, and then KB can't help herself. She's got to be honest too. Fern is the girl boss here. It makes sense though. She's seen it from her mom, right? The unclaimsies and the no boys allowed stuff, that was a big hit with my two girls. And we're in about 28 minutes into the show so far. I wouldn't change a thing. This is turning out to be a great show. Wim, he's sticking with his Jedi Temple idea. Fern cooks up another lie. She attributes it to her grandfather, saying this was a failed residential area and it was sealed up because of a sewage station accident and it released poison gas and they're trapped inside. So is this foreshadowing? Will we see a scene later in the episode or in the series with poison gas and characters getting stuck inside? At any rate, this time Wim falls for this lie because he and Neil get startled when they bang on the door. When Fern bangs on the door with her shovel. She sells it by getting up close and then listening, and then she backs off when they do the same, and then she bangs on it. They also fall for her Tom Sawyering them into quote-unquote painting the picket fence. So I played Tom Sawyer in a play like way back in 5th grade, so I remember this tactic well. Reverse psychology ploy.
If we open it, then we get to go in and look. Deal? Deal.
It's dark outside. Wendell returns home. He does not see Wim, so he's worried. Meanwhile, the boys, they're still digging.
These girls are so dumb. Hey, watch it!
These boys are so dumb.
You didn't have to be so mean. They did find it.
Wim is still hoping it's a Jedi temple. Fern just wants the adventure and a new power converter. When they uncover the door lock, KB notices and she comes in with her visor for a closer look. Somehow, though, she has the right equipment to hook up this Geordie LaForge type visor up to the lock, and the door opens. They go inside. Fern hears Wendell calling out to Wim, and then we get a "you're going to be in trouble" moment between the kids. You're going to be in trouble. And then Wim heads further in, and that's when he finds a droid.
Looks like it died pulling this lever.
Do not touch that.
Well, I'm not gonna pull it. Well, you almost did.
Well, I'm not going to.
Okay, then don't. Well, I won't. Just because I'm about to
I think there's something inside.
Neil here notices something, of course, and it performs a very Peregrine Took type act here, with the droid's arm pulling down on the lever. Now, it doesn't alert the orcs from inside Moria, but it does close the doors, probably just like it did when the droid pulled down on the lever the first time to deactivate the ship and close the doors. The kids are now trapped. And then we get this point of view cutaway showing the kids cannot be heard from outside the ship. KB suggests, hey, let's follow the conduit to a power source. Makes sense. But Wim is still thinking Jedi Temple.
Jedi temples have all sorts of secret passageways.
Just ignore him. And don't touch anything. This is so great.
Great? Yeah, it's exciting. We're exploring.
Yep. Exploring.
Did you know that some Jedi temples could lower down and bury themselves in times of danger?
Listen, all we gotta do is find the power before we run out of air.
Neil abandons Wim to go with the girls. He says, I just want to go home. So, kind of like an E.T. reference inside a very reasonable kid concern, right? Wim, he wanders off. He's still hoping this is a Jedi temple. Then he comes across the cockpit and sees his reflection in the glass, or the screen. Meanwhile, KB finds the power source, thinks it's in hibernation mode, and Fern wants to wake up the beast, right? So maybe this is the beast. She wants to wake it up out of hibernation mode. KB just bangs on it with a tool and gets it started. It's like, did you try reset? We hear the ship start up. Plenty of Star Wars ship sounds while it's booting up. And then a headset pops down in the cockpit near Wim. In his excitement, he radios Neil. And this gets Fern interested.
Jedi 1 to Jedi 2.
I found something amazing, but don't tell the girls.
Whatever it is, don't touch it.
Huh? Okay, listen, I was wrong. It isn't a temple. It's even better.
Don't touch
anything. Power's up. We can open the hatch, get out, and get back home.
I mean, it's a blinking green light. Green means go, right? I mean, it's not like it was a big red light flashing and a loud warning beep. This was a little beep and a nice green light. On the one hand, you think to yourself, I mean, what are you doing pressing this button? And on the other hand, I mean, that's the story, right? I mean, if he doesn't press it and they don't fly off, we don't have a show. But it kind of makes sense anyways. There was this delay between the press and the startup, so There's some deniability, but they weren't with him. The kids group up. By the time they reach the door, the ship is rising out of the ground. Wendell, he found Wim's helmet earlier, and now he sees there's a ship rising out of the ground. He feels the ground shake. Wim lies to Fern when they get together. He says, I didn't touch anything. Well, he did touch something. It might not have been his fault. It might have just started up on its own. I think it was him pressing the button. The kids realize, hey, we got to get out of here. It's too late. This is a starship and it's taking off. Wim calls out to his dad and almost falls out or off the ship, but Neil, Fern, and KB drag him back inside just in time, and the ship is apparently on autopilot. Ship's alarms are going off, and then they get past the barrier, and they're in outer space. Everything gets calm, long enough for them to be amazed by the sight of stars. Something we know that they don't know is the ship is about to jump to light speed. And it does. The episode ends, and it heads into this jaunty, pirate-sounding credit sequence. This is where we leave you with episode 1. So what do you think? I mean, I purposely only watched the first episode, so it's going to be easier for me to keep my thoughts straight, at least through the first episode, and I will build on what we know from episode 1 when we review episode 2. And I will watch that after this episode is completed and released. I loved episode 1. I loved it. I cannot wait for episode 2. I'm looking forward to it. And everybody that I've talked to says the same thing. And now, as I've mentioned, episode 2 is already available. It's called Way, Way Out Past the Barrier. And the description for that one is, a surprising first stop marks the beginning of an unexpected journey. The next episode's shorter. It's only 32 minutes, which means it'll probably only be about 25 minutes of action. This podcast is, well, it's over an hour already. So even though I'm going to get right to work on the next episode, you can still send feedback and comments. There's 6 more weeks, too. The rest of the episodes are going to come weekly on Tuesday nights. In the meantime, you can join in the discussion with me by sending in your thoughts via email at thisisthewaypodcast@gmail.com. We now have a blue check on X. I don't know if you noticed that. Hopefully that investment pays off. We have Instagram at thisisthewaypod, Facebook.com at /thisisthewaypod. But you can check out our Linktree site for the links, linktr.ee/thisisthewaypod. Thank you for joining me for This Is The Way Podcast recap and discussion on the first episode of the first season of Skeleton Crew. Coming next should be a short review of episode 2, again with a special guest or two. I'm your host, Steve Lascalzo, and this is The Way. May the Force be with you, always.